Hello, Ben. How are you this evening?
Hi there.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for attending.
Hey guys, Chelsea's here.
Hello, how are you?
Hi there.
I can
Great,
see
thanks. How are you, Bonnie?
real good. I can see and hear you perfectly, and hopefully everybody will join in the next minute. We can get started.
Fantastic. I'm gonna mute myself.
That's fine. Hi, Mr. Ely. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Real good. I can see and hear you perfectly fine, so hopefully we'll get everybody on here in a minute. We can get started.
Okie dokie.
Hi, Zachary. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Real good. I can see and hear you good too. So we have, let's see, Zach, Chelsea, Jeffrey, and Jasmine. Just need one more person, Jeff.
And you care to serve as the planning and zoning officer this evening?
You sound a little far away, Jeffrey.
That's all I got. How are we doing?
Real good. So I got to get on the phone real quick and try and get Monty on here. I know he's trying to connect, and we still need Cliff. So I will see what I can do to get Monty on.
John and Suzanne, would you be willing to start without the fifth and just have the hemp discussion, given it's not a voting? That was a yes.
Yeah, I think actually you could open the meeting and have that without a quorum. Is that okay, John? Since that's more of just an informational kind of discussion.
Right. Well, until there's a quorum, we don't really have a meeting. So, I mean, you guys
Okay.
you can free to discuss anything you want because none of the restrictions that apply until we have a quorum.
Hold on one second, Monty. Would you like me to start recording?
No, we got the word that we should wait for our infamous 5th of 8.
Okay.
But maybe Suzanne can tell us if we have a 6th on the way. I think today was a planning and zoning discussion at the OCC.
I was not able to listen to that discussion, so I don't know the outcome of that conversation. That would be your 9th. Um,
Thank you, Monty. Bonnie, you ready to roll?
Yep.
Bonnie Shiles, can we start?
Yep. Sorry, I was still talking to Monty. Monty is now connected and ready to go. And I am recording.
Good evening. It is 5:05 p.m. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of Pitkin County, Colorado. Today is July 20th, 2021. We are not in the Roaring Fork meeting room, but we are enjoying the presence of everyone on Zoom. Thank you for calling in from wherever you may be. This evening, we have 2 agenda items. This meeting's been called to order. On the line, on the Zoom, we have Chelsea, Jasmine, Zach, Monty, and myself, Jeffrey Woodruff. From Pitkin County staff, we have John Ely, County Attorney, Suzanne Wolf, Planning, and Bonnie Shiles. And I also want to thank Ben Anderson, who's joined us. There's been some conversations recently between the city and the county. Ben Anderson, the principal long-range planner with the city of Aspen, and I invited him to one of our last meetings. City of Aspen actually just, I guess, 3 months ago, updated their fee in lieu and their affordable housing credit. So I thought it was prescient in terms of timing. We're working on some of the same projects that Ben at least he's dropped to join us this evening. Meeting's called to order at 5:05 p.m. Commissioner comments unrelated to the employee impact fee, which John Ely will cover. That was the bulk of your package. So there is one commissioner comment unrelated to this evening's agenda. We figured since John was with us for the employee impact fee, we would also have a discussion regarding industrial hemp. And you'll remember that on March 16th of this year, the Planning and Zoning voted 4-2 against the Land Use Code text amendment for the hemp amendment, and it was passed. I think it was 4-1 in turn by the Board of County Commissioners. So the reason for this, hopefully, albeit brief conversation, because the bulk of this meeting should be the employee impact fee, was just aligning what was adopted by the county commissioners with the current land use code. So really, there's just 3 points. And some of, again, the text changed from when it was heard by planning and zoning to what was finally adopted by the county commissioners. So the first sort of error, or the first where what was adopted by the county commissioners doesn't line up with the current land use code is Chapter 4, Section B, Section 1, which discusses farming, and specifically farming in rural and remote Pitkin County. And specifically, it says in the rural and remote zone district, agricultural operations and practices are limited to those that were in existence prior to the property being zoned to rural and remote. And so again, that language wasn't there when it went through planning and zoning. And for some reason, when it went through the county commissioners, they had the ability with an administrative review to farm hemp in rural and remote Pitkin County, which again seems discordant or in violation of the current land use code. So that's one. And I'll just go through the 3 points. We can again briefly discuss them. Thank you, John, for joining us. The second one is the land use code text amendment. Again, violates sort of land use code 3/2010, which states the preservation of the rural and agricultural character of Pitkin County is the primary goal of the Pitkin County Master Plan. So again, growing hemp in rural and remote seems like it's violating the current land use code, or contradicts the current land use code. And then the third one was really the bulk of our conversation, which was around the orders to cease operations, which again, I think violates Title 39. And Title 39 says a farm is a parcel of land which is used to produce agricultural products that originate from land's productivity for the primary purpose of obtaining monetary profit. And by citing someone with a violation and then delaying, potentially growing and/or harvesting the crops, which sound like from the text amendment would be in the 30-40 day range, you're violating the word farm and violating Title 39. So those are basically the three areas where I think what was adopted by what we did not vote in favor of at planning and zoning, but then again, came up at county commissioner level, does not seem like it's in accordance with the currently adopted land use code. Sorry, John, for that long-winded introduction. So I'm going to restate the three very quickly.
Well, this is appropriately noticed on your agenda. So I would encourage the commission to have a discussion of Jeffrey's memo regarding hemp. And if the commission can agree on a recommendation to forward to the BOCC, I will take it to them myself. I'm looking at Jeffrey's memo now. I guess I wouldn't characterize it as being in violation of the land use code simply because it supersedes other sections, but it is more out of conformance with the sections that Jeffrey has mentioned in his memo. And so and I can tell you, it went back and forth in front of the BOCC. First it was in, it was out, it was all over the place really with rural and remote. And there were comments made at the BOCC review that were consistent with comments made at the P&Z. But as Jeffrey said, the vote went 4-1 at the BOCC, sort of the flip of the P&Z. So I think that, it's appropriate for the commission to discuss this. And as I said, if you can arrive at a recommendation, I will make sure that the BOCC hears it and makes a decision whether to act on it or not. The BOCC, I guess I would say they were torn between trying to recognize the fact that this was an impactive land use to neighboring properties, but at the same time not wanting to overly burden agricultural enterprises, so to speak. And so I guess it led to the result that you guys see. I don't know if I can elaborate on the discussion too much more than that. It was a difficult issue, as you guys know, particularly concerning the fact that there was a property that was exacerbating the concerns of neighbors, but at the same time, we had two other properties in the county that were conducting hemp cultivation activity that were not impacted at all. And in fact, most people weren't even aware of it. So I guess my suggestion would be to take the 3 points in sequence and see if the commission has any questions for me, and if not, then to see if the commission can vote on or agree on a recommendation to pass back to the BOCC.
planning and zoning commissioners, the 3 points were conformance with the rural and remote zone district, which again, right now it's verboten to add agricultural operations to practice. That one seems like a clear violation, given we can now grow hemp at rural and remote in Pickens County. That was one. 2 was again sort of conformance with master plans and land use code 3/2010, which is the preservation of the rural and agricultural character of Pickens County, which in some ways is similar to number 1. And number 3 was really going back to our original conversation, which was the order to cease operations and treating hemp, which is an agricultural crop, like mining and manufacturing. And that was, again, a large part of our conversation on March 16th. And that, again, violates Title 39, which is really, farming is a monetary gain for profit. So those are the 3 points. There's nothing else, sort of in the memo that I think I sent around with the link to the employee impact fee DOTC video that I'd be interested in forwarding to DOTC on behalf of P&Z. But no one's emotionally charged by him. Would
You're
anyone like to
calling
make a
for-
motion to not?
Are you calling for comment now, Jeffrey? Is that what you're asking, like feedback on your memo?
Yes.
Or are you making a motion? Well, I remember being this is one of those moments where I wish that I took notes, detailed notes. I mean, I think I did take notes that night just for the purposes of asking John questions. But did I save them? No. And normally I save everything because I'm a lawyer. So this is out of character for me not to have written notes to refer to. So I'm trying really hard to refresh my memory. But the one thing that sticks out the most is the dissatisfaction with the manner in which the whole issue and subject was, hurried through, it seemed like. And then not that Mr. Ely's research wasn't very thorough and well prepared and done over a great amount of time, but the amount of time that planning and zoning had to consider it was certainly short, and it was immediately bumped through in a rush to mitigate or enforce and regulate this current growing season. So that rubbed me the wrong way at the time, because when you hurry things through, then generally you miss important aspects or you do something wrong. And I think Jeffrey's pointed out the not wrong, but the flaws in the law as it exists and is adopted today. So I certainly think it's worth taking another look at it and reconsidering it with a different frame of mind, not a frame of mind as to how do we discourage growing hemp, but how do we, slap red tape all over an activity that ought to be promoted in rural remote areas, but how do we encourage it and how do we work with all members of the community there so that people who feel like their land use rights are being violated by an encroachment of odor have a legitimate economic purpose to grow hemp in a rural remote agricultural area. So I guess I'm glad that Jeffrey's brought it to our attention, because at the time in March, it rubbed me the wrong way that we were making a law to benefit the neighbors that were upset about the smell. Really, that's what it seemed to boil down to. And we were taking a lot of liberty in our assumption that what we were doing was legally correct at the time. So I encourage us all to reconsider and take note of Jeffrey's points, because I think they're legitimate and point out what we should have been considering all along. But that's my 10 cents.
Zach or Monty?
It's Monty. I came in really late to the conversation, so I'm not really sure what all the points are. But I think with Chelsea, I agree that we kind of went through this the last time, and I'd like to kind of just go through your points real quick, Jeffrey, if you could. I'm sorry, I didn't have audio before, so I'm just a little bit behind the plane here.
Yeah, and again, just to keep this really focused, the county commissioners voted and adopted language to restrict the growing of hemp, which basically satisfies the concerns of Emma Fields. What I'm strictly focused on is not revisiting the conversation nor the resolution, but conformance with land use code. And I think John even said that, like, corrected me, thank you. That's all, I think that's all we should focus on, is that, look, we should, given the land use code says specifically in the rural remote zone district, agricultural operations and practices are limited to those that were in existence prior to the property being zoned rural and remote. We shouldn't have any new hemp farms in rural and remote, period. Not even within administrative review. And so that's where I think the laser sharp focus of this memo is not revisiting the March conversation. It's saying, based on what the BOCC adopted, we would like to see this language to be in conformance with the existing land use code. And again, to Chelsea's point, not just satisfying the short-term needs of Emma Fields, and I think I said the malodorous Emma Fields and less than salubrious neighborhood as a result. So you can't put that into memos.
So
Okay, I got,
Does that make,
yeah.
Sorry.
if other commissioners don't have Jeffrey's memo in front of them, the point being in this first issue is that without the hemp regulation, the restriction on rural and remote is that agricultural activity, in other words, expressed as farming or ranching, is an allowable activity and can occur in rural and remote zone district. However, table 4.1 or 4-1 in the land use code has a qualification which states that agricultural activity must be consistent with the operations and practices that were in place already on property zoned rural and remote at the time of the rezoning. And so different areas of the county were zoned rural and remote at different times, but I think it's a fairly safe assumption that there was absolutely no industrial hemp cultivation going on. So it would not be allowed as a already existing operation or practice prior to rural and remote zoning. So the change that the hemp regulation allowed is that it allowed hemp cultivation in rural and remote as a special review use, which means that it could ultimately be approved as an activity within rural and remote. So, and this was the point the BOCC went back and forth literally 3 times. First, rural and remote was in, then it was out, then it was in, and then it was out, and then it came back in finally when the darn thing was adopted. So if the P&Z I don't want to rush the P&Z by any means. If you want to take another look at this whole issue of hemp and take your time with it, as opposed to the more immediate issue that was simply a function of circumstance, the way the issue came up and had to be dealt with, then that would be great. Otherwise, I think what you're really considering is whether or not to recommend to the BOCC that the ability to get a special review approval for hemp cultivation should not be afforded to the rural and remote zone district. Did I say that correctly, Jeffrey?
Yeah, number one is the strongest point. Number one is I think the crux of this. 2 and 3 are semantics. It's really this got, and again, this got slipped in because it wasn't in the 316 packet with P&Z. So yeah, if we wanted super laser sharp focus, it would just be number 1, and I drop 2 and 3 and just say, let it go. Yeah. So do we have enough guidance with that to draft a memo to John to go to BOCC, Suzanne?
I mean, I think if you all, right, basically you would be recommending that there be an exception to that special review provision, that it could not apply somebody in rural remote would not be available to them. I think that would be enough, John, if you made that recommendation for us to then put that into a resolution of recommendation to amend the code to reflect that. And we could then pull out the appropriate, code section and whatnot to do that.
Yeah, I mean, really, the change is pretty simple. You just have to delete the special review nomination for industrial help cultivation that appears in regard to rural remote zone district. So it's literally just deleting a letter from that table 4-1. And as I mentioned, you guys, had this on your agenda. It was added before the agenda was published, and so it is perfectly legitimate and certainly legal for the commission to take a vote on it, to pass on a recommendation for the BOCC to make that change, if that's your desire.
My desire would be to clean it up and make that recommendation this evening. It's the cleanest. You're here. Thank you. And the reason why you're on the agenda twice, it just makes the most sense. So do I need to draft it in real time?
No, I think I would suggest to the commission, if this is the direction you want to go, is simply a motion and a vote on the motion to remove rural remote from consideration of industrial hemp cultivation by special review, and that would do it. And not to minimize your other 2 points that you raised, because they're certainly interesting and somewhat nuanced positions of the code, but worth talking about for sure. But it seems like with that correction, you address the problem without having to get too much further beyond that.
We avoid the blind weeds. Sorry, ag joke. This will work better. So at this point, I would entertain. I can read my notes. A resolution of Pickens County Planning and Zoning to delete or remove the special review in rural and remote, section 4B1, industrial hemp. I'm looking for a motion.
I'll make the motion.
And I'll second that motion.
So I have a first from Monty, a second from Chelsea. Any further discussion regarding the deleting or removing of the special review in rural and remote of industrial hemp as per the table in section 4B1? Vote of the Planning and Zoning, Pickens County, Colorado, recommending to the Board of County Commissioners the deleting or removing of the special review in rural and remote as per the table in section chapter 4B1, the use for the growing and industrial hemp. Chelsea?
I vote in favor.
Jasmine? She's here but not here.
Jasmine, it's *6 to unmute yourself.
Zach?
I vote in favor.
Thank you. And thanks for the cool poster behind you. I'm reading Hunter S. Thompson as we speak, the complete Rolling Stone. Monty?
In favor.
So Jeffrey's in favor. That's 4, and I'm missing a 5th vote, which is Jasmine.
I think we lost Jasmine. I'm going to have to reach out to her.
At this point, we passed 4-0. Any other commissioner comment unrelated to the hemp discussion? John, thank you for your time on that.
Jeffrey, just 1 sec before you leave the hemp behind. What we'll do, if it's acceptable to the commission, is we'll generate a resolution for Staff signature, that would be Suzanne and myself, and Jeffrey's signature as the current chair of the P&Z on a resolution forward to the BOCC, and we'll include in there not only the motion, the action that the commission took, but also the general justification for it, in that it would eliminate an inconsistency that was adopted by the BOCC whenever that date was, in regard to availability in rural remote zone district. If that's, is that okay with the commission, then we'll handle it that way.
And I'm happy with the memo that was in the packet to be public as well, because again, it goes through our thinking in terms of inconsistency, but the focus in terms of
Well,
defining whatever. I'm flexible.
Will you circulate that draft resolution to the P&Z commissioners for our information?
If you want, or we can
Please.
we can circulate it before we have it signed to see if anybody wants to make any changes. What's your preference?
I don't think we want to make any changes.
Sure,
I just,
I'm sure.
okay.
I doubt I'll have any changes, but I would like to just see it to make sure it conforms with what we all just agreed on in our vote.
Right. That's, well, I didn't think changes was the wrong thing to say, but for you guys to review it and to be comfortable with the wording.
That would be appreciated, John.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. And Jeff, Jeffrey, your memo is a public record in that it's part of the P&Z action and so forth. So it's in the record, so to speak. It would not be normally attached to the commission's resolution unless you wanted it to be. What's your thinking there?
Just again, showing the logic. The resolution doesn't show the logic, it just shows the end result. So that was the only reason to include it. And it's
And that's
not
why
uncharacteristic. Yeah, it's not uncharacteristic. For example, when we do larger reviews that we submit questions in advance, and we actually attach those, the questions and the answers.
Hey Jasmine, it's Bonnie Childs. I noticed that we dropped you off of the P&Z call. I'm wondering.
So
I just think your memo would be attached to the packet that goes to the BOCC. It's not an attachment to the resolution.
that's correct.
Findings based on this discussion, but then we would include that when we bring it on to the BOCC.
That sounds perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. Planning staff, unrelated to hemp and or employee impact fee. We have a new caucus.
Yes, the board did form the Brush Creek Caucus, or whatever the appropriate term is. John would know, but so yeah, they'll be establishing bylaws, and they will be a new caucus and referral agency for us. Other than that, I don't think I have any updates for you at this point.
Excellent.
So maybe, you may know, the Pandora discussion is going back to the BOCC. It will start its journey at the BOCC on August 25th. So I know there's been some stuff out in the newspapers, as that's coming up, but again, you all have been involved in that conversation. So if you're interested in following that, that will be the noticed, public hearing to start that process.
And who owns Aiken County Solar today?
Is it Primergy? Is that the operator?
But we've broken ground.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
We've broken ground.
Yeah, they're definitely under construction. Right. Leslie did an update to the BOCC this week on sort of construction update, and yep, things are on the move.
The other planning staff. This is a public meeting, and again, Ben, you're the sole public that we have this evening. You are welcome to comment, and I appreciate again you joining us. Again, Ben is a principal and long-range planner with the City of Aspen, and he just pushed through ordinances 10 through 13 that are the subject we're about to touch on. But Ben, if you had anything for us, before we kick off the employee impact fee conversation? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, Jeffrey and P&Z commissioners, thanks for the opportunity to be here with you this evening. I'm really just here to kind of listen in on your conversation. And if you have any questions about what the city just did, our methodology, I'm happy to answer any of those questions.
Thanks again for joining us. Zach Hendricks, any updates from your green pasture?
Not at this time, no.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. At this point, we have one land use action. It is the employee housing impact fee amendment. And John, I'm going to ask you to take your time and go through it because I know there's, I sent the link to the BOCC presentation to the planning and zoning commissioners so they could watch that in advance. I did attend your initial presentation and heard the feedback from many of the commissioners and obviously, how it's landed on our desk today. But again, the table's yours.
All right, well, let's see. I was trying to decide what the best way to do this would be.
And
Give you guys time to ask questions and to think about it. And maybe if I just share my screen. Let's see.
And while you're doing that, just to roll the tape back a year, we heard the original employee impact fee, and everyone should now know this is the 1-year review. And at the 1-year review of the BOCC, they remanded it back to planning and zoning. And I did send John a note in advance saying my recollection of the conversation we had a year ago was, we wanted to hear more about not only the fees, but the uses, I think was a big one. How are we spending the money? Is it just opportunistic? So it might be nice to run through some of the projects. And then I guess just an overall question is, how is Pitkin County, and again, we can say this to the end, but how is Pitkin County sort of sharing its load in terms of employee impact fee vis-a-vis Eagle, Garfield, everyone else down Valley, and sort of, are we pulling our share in, if you will? So John, sorry, that was my setup.
All right, I guess I'll launch into a description of the fee itself, just to sort of refresh everybody as to what we're doing. In 2020, a year ago, the county changed its methodology of calculating the impact fee. And that primarily was, well, that exclusively was the discussion that we had a year ago, which led to your recommendation and then the BOCC's adoption of the code amendments that reflected the change in methodology for the calculation of the fee. That calculation is reflected in this chart that's on the screen now. The methodology left behind an analysis based upon, say, construction costs, land acquisition costs, and so forth, and short-circuited the analysis somewhat to make it easier, I think, to appreciate what goes into the calculation of the fee. It also makes it easier to update the fee. We do it every year now pursuant to the ordinance that the BOCC enacted establishing this fee. And we can, obviously justify it. It's legally defensible. And in my opinion, it's sound. It grew out of efforts initially that were begun through APCHA. And that obviously involved the city and the county participating in it. That was done prior to the recession, back when Tom McCabe was the director of APCHA. He put out an RFP for a firm to come up with a methodology that would be acceptable to all three entities, the city, the county, and APCHA, and ended up by retaining a consulting firm that produced this type of analysis. The city and the county participated in the retention of that firm and then the discussion of the analysis, but near the culmination, if you will. The city decided not to go on that particular path. I never did get a full description of why that happened or how it happened or what the concerns might be. But when the city pulled out, that necessarily left APCHA out because, you know, the city and the county are the two creators of the multi-jurisdictional authority. And then the county, you know, one of the reasons that we joined into the effort was because it made logical sense to us, for me in particular, that we revise our methodology. It was just a mess. It was hard to upkeep and to make current. It was hard to calculate. And it just had a lot of difficulties to it. And to me, the logic was apparent that we're dealing with an impact fee that concerns one particular type of impact. And the three different governmental entities, not jurisdictions, but the three entities were all concerned with the same thing. It made sense to have all three of us on the same page. But right after that event, we were in a recession. And so everybody basically stopped talking about it. The discussion became very quickly one of not collecting a fee that had development paying its way so much as not creating a burden on the construction or real estate development industries that underpin really the largest part of the economy in Pickens County. So it stayed where it was until the recession was well over. It was discussed on and off for a few years. And then finally, the BOCC asked that it be brought out and reanalyzed in 2019. And that led to the ultimate adoption in 2020, just before we all shut down our offices with the pandemic. So the methodology that the county uses, rather than looking at cost of construction, cost of land acquisition, and so forth, is to look at what the study defines as an affordability gap. And so what we do is we analyze the income of Pickens County residents as that is made available to us through the United States Housing and Urban Development Department. And the HUD puts out new calculations and levels that reflect area median income every year. They do it usually at the beginning of the second quarter, which is why the review of the housing impact fee is coincident with that release. So even though the fee is relatively easy to calculate, we could recalibrate the amount of the fee, you know, every month. It only really makes logical sense to do it when we have new income data available. So we use the income data that comes out of HUD to determine what the level of affordability is to somebody making 100% of the area median income. I'm sorry?
So for
That's
some
AMI, correct.
Sorry, John. 5:42 p.m. and we don't have a quorum.
We don't?
So Mr. Weiss is just back from Florida, did prep. Suzanne Kowski is in a medical meeting at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, the third Tuesday. And I don't see Jasmine. So I guess it's a question for Bonnie. I mean, I want you to continue, but I don't want to, and I love that we have time so we don't feel pressed. And I really want to have this conversation. But I'm embarrassed by I'm not embarrassed. Bonnie, do we have Jasmine Tiger?
I contacted Jasmine. She said she had an emergency and will not be coming back on this evening.
What's the quorum? What
We have
constitutes a quorum? X out of
5 out of 8.
And that's not a quorum? Wow, okay.
We only have 4 people.
You want me to try and reach out to Cliff real quick and see why he's not on?
Chelsea, that's true. We only have 4. Okay, got it.
Sorry, John. I love that we don't have a rush and we have this as the only agenda item.
Yeah.
And I really want to have this conversation.
John was on a roll too.
I hate to stop once I get a head of steam going.
No, and it's,
You were on a roll and I was following you. I understood it all.
Well, thanks,
And I think-
thanks, Chelsea. I appreciate that. I was always worried that. you know, just-
I was right there with you. I was like, oh, keep going. I understood.
Well, do you guys want to try to reach Cliff, or how do you want to, or do you want to just end the meeting and reschedule, or what are your thoughts?
I'm texting Mr. Weiss.
This also is a subject, I think, that we're having more people from P and Z on it, a bigger night. You know, this is pretty important stuff. I think that it might be whether we just table it until we get a bigger group in here. That's kind of my
Are
thought.
you already scheduled for that BOCC?
It's scheduled for the BOCC, but that's, you know, it's easily bounced. So it was scheduled for the BOCC essentially just to hold a position on their agenda, figuring you guys would do something tonight. But if, you know, if you didn't reach a conclusion tonight or something else like, you know, this, we'll just keep kicking it back on the BOCC's schedule.
Your next meeting would be August 3rd, and we do not have any items scheduled on that agenda right now. So that would be the next available.
And I guess for my business, that pushing this back is the impact would include all permits that are currently in queue. So we're just delaying a change that is we're reducing the money available to affordable housing because we're not increasing it as per the annual review. So delaying it's not exactly the best business.
That's true.
I think we have to delay it as efficient as it would have been to have a meeting today and take care of it today. If we don't have quorum, it's and we're missing, you know, important voices on the board. I think that we have to delay it.
Do you guys, are you familiar with folks' schedule on the 3rd of August? I mean, that's kind of getting into the swing time of vacation. Do you think, you know, most people are around, or what do you think?
I have a conflict on the 3rd, just as an FYI. So I won't.
No, I
be
don't want to lose you. You were appreciating my presentation up to that point. I need you back.
The fact that I understand it is, you know, amazing because of all the letters and numbers and math involved. The fact that I'm following you is remarkable in and of itself. But and I apologize, but I have a conflict that day.
Life happens.
Excuse me, I still think we should have more people involved in this one because it's a pretty, you know, it's pretty significant. And John does better with a bigger audience, even, I think, probably. So.
Well, I can email out tomorrow and see with everybody else if we're able, you know, how many people we're able to get on the 3rd.
So Cliff Weiss is joined. We have a quorum.
Close, yeah. She has one like mine, then she has one like this.
Hi, Cliff.
Hello there,
Yay, we're glad you could join us.
temporarily. long enough to give you a quorum. Hello?
Hi, Cliff.
We hear you, Cliff.
John,
You can
John and
run-
Suzanne, would you like to proceed?
Sure, if we're back up and running, we have a quorum, so what was I saying?
Inconvenience.
At any
You
rate,
were,
so the county's
you were just talking about the.
So the county's methodology takes a look at the area median income first to try to deduce what is an affordable purchase for somebody making 100% of the area median income, or AMI. And then we take data from the assessor's office, which is continually maintained, of course, every time there's a transaction, and any kind of instrument is recorded against any property in the county that is processed through the clerk's office, and the assessor picks it up. And what we do is we take sales data of free market residential properties. And what we do is we look at the square footage, the heated square footage of the sales involved, get just doing simple arithmetic, get a value per square foot. And then we multiply it out into the size of a average or expected affordable housing unit or employee housing unit. And then we look at the gap. There's a difference between what's affordable and then a difference between what is out there in the free market, and that becomes the fee. The fee then is refined a little bit more in that we added administrative cost to it to keep the program up and running, staff time and so forth. There are quite a few folks who have a hand in administrating this in ComDev and in the finance department too, for that matter. That's the next thing. So we then reduce that single family dwelling unit to an equivalency for a single FTE or full-time employee. And so that number is the actual fee. When that fee is translated and imposed on any developer of property, that fee is then taken and multiplied by what the employee generation is that is associated with the level of development. Usually the level of development is analyzed by the type of development, whether it's commercial or tourist or residential or unclassified, which is the code's manner of picking up anything that doesn't fall within our three major development categories. And then we also analyze that type of development against the size of the development, square footage. And then we calculate what the expected rate of employee generation is, not only for the use of the property once it's developed, but also the construction of the improvements associated with the development approval that was granted for the property. If the property owner doesn't want to pay the fee, there are some outs, one of which is an independent fee calculation, which basically goes to the fact that, hey, you think I'm generating X number of employees, but I'm really generating less. Let me show you. And so there's an ability to do that. If the property owner doesn't want to pay the fee, but is willing to provide housing on the property, which could be, an attached or detached structure that relates to the principal use of the property, like a residential improvement, or if it's an apartment or something less than a freestanding single-family structure, then it can be incorporated within, say, a commercial development profile or something like that. And so then the person doesn't, if the person is creating actual housing, then the person doesn't have to pay the impact fee. Another way is to buy existing housing and to restrict its use and occupancy consistent with the housing program, or to dedicate land, which is to say give land to the county that the county can then develop. So there are other things that can happen in the administration of the fee, but basically it's a two-step process. We analyze what it costs to house a one singular FTE, full-time employee in the marketplace of every calendar year. Well, it doesn't quite, we do the calculation in April, so it's April to April, so not quite calendar year. And then multiply that number by how many employees are being generated. So that's the calculation. Pursuant to the ordinance that the BOCC adopted, the fee is reevaluated every year automatically, and a new fee is created. So when the fee was first adopted in 2020, the cost for the creation of one full-time employee, that amount of employment, generated a fee that was $200,840. When the fee was re-examined the spring of this year, the fee automatically increased to $214,532. Those numbers are in the memo. I'm just reading them out to highlight them for this discussion. So you see an increase of about 7% or so in the fee that has already been incorporated into the exactions or the impact fee that is now being imposed on development. So the BOCC, when they adopted this thing in 2020, asked that it be brought back and presented to them so that they basically keep an eye on where the fee is, make sure that they have their hand on things, that the fee doesn't get either too large or too small, and so that they're aware of what's going on. The same time that occurs, the BOCC can take a look at the rest of the analysis and the other variables that goes into the calculation of the fee. So in the chart that's up on the screen share, what I've done is highlight in yellow the aspects of the fee calculation that are reviewed every year. So you've got the household income that gets reported by HUD. You've got the cost of private mortgage insurance, which most purchasers of employee housing have to pay. Generally speaking, if you're a better loan risk and you're borrowing money for a principal dwelling, you're not faced with that type of cost. But by and large, most purchasers of affordable housing or employee housing are paying PMI. And we also look at the mortgage interest rate, and that's done by simply canvassing lenders in the area. When we get an accepted rate, which reflects a variety of different lenders that are contacted. This year we contacted Alpine Bank, Roaring Fork Realty, Zillow, who doesn't look at that, Realtor.com, NerdWallet, and the Credit Union of Colorado to get a general amount for interest rates of, let's see, what was our number? Actually it was 3.125%. We add a point to that to bring it up to 4.125%, simply because, again, most times purchasers of affordable housing or employee housing don't necessarily have the best credit, and so they are typically paying a premium on their interest rate. And then we take a look at the median market price for square footage of residential space associated with residential properties that have been transacted in the last year. The way we calculate that is we first, the assessor's office does it for us, and they generate a program which is fairly automatic once it's set up. So it grabs everything recorded that reflects the sale of a residential property, spits it out over on one side, and then it starts to eliminate properties. It eliminates the sales of properties of any type of deed restricted property, so like for other affordable properties that have sold. Eliminates properties that involve fractional interests, mobile homes that have a mixed use of the property, say a commercial and residential use on the property. Sales that reflect more than one residential use or more than one residential dwelling unit on a property, and sales that involve more than 5 acres of land. And the reason those types of sales are excluded is because they tend to reflect other values than just the residential improvement, which we're trying to focus in on. So once we get that list refined, we then compare the sales price of every sale in any given year to the square footage involved, the heated square footage involved, so that we're not including in there barns or other outbuildings that might be associated with some properties. We'll divide that up to get a price per square foot. When we have that, then we take that and multiply it. In this case, we're multiplying it by 1,100 square feet, which is the, I can't say average, but it seems to be the median size of employee units in the current inventory of the county and APCHA. So we multiply that out to get a value which would reflect a residential dwelling unit of 1,100 square feet at a current free market sales price. Now, when I say current, I should explain that a little bit. What we do is we use a 3-year rolling median to make the calculation. That way, if there's a fall off in the market or a spike in the market, certainly like the one we're seeing right now, then that spike or that dip won't overly impact the cost of acquiring residential property. So we get a more a more flat reflection on what the value is. It's either going to trend up or it's going to trend down or trend level, but it won't be going up and down and be subject to wild variations. So those things are done every spring, and that was done this spring, and that's what resulted in the 7% or so increase. So the other things, though, that are available for analysis or inspection are the items that I've highlighted in green. So at the bottom, which is an easy thing, a 10% administrative charge, because the program is relatively new under this particular methodology, we pick 10% because it's generally an accepted level of administrative cost. But hopefully over time, we'll have enough history of managing the program that we can put in an actual amount of the cost so that we don't overcharge the impact fee, or we don't discount the impact fee unknowingly. It reflects a truer cost of implementing the program. The other thing going up the list and highlighted in green is this size of the average or the median employee housing unit. Right now, it's, as I said, it's 1,100 square feet. It might be appropriate to re-examine that at some time and see if that should be changed, because that would certainly impact the final impact fee amount. The other aspect going up the chart is the unincorporated or the sales of residential properties. Right now, what the county utilizes is sales in the unincorporated area of Pitkin County. So we don't use sales in any of our 3 municipal areas. The reason that the BOCC made that election is they thought it was sort of in the middle of the road. This is area of the county that's under the county's jurisdiction. Seems to make sense to stick with that. However, when you look at where the county has been active in affordable housing or employee housing, there doesn't really seem to be a restriction to only concern ourselves with the unincorporated area of the county. In fact, there is a decided bias to try to put employee housing within at least the UGB, if not an incorporated municipality, and to reduce the aspect of, say, sprawl or development of residential properties up and down the Highway 82 corridor or out in other rural aspects of the county. So that's one of the topics that's up for consideration by the commission. The BOCC discussed that for a couple of its work sessions and said, we really ought to just broaden this to make it more reflective of where the county wants to see affordable or employee housing constructed. And that would be the entire county with no limitation, including the municipalities. When you include residential sales in this calculus, into this chart, not limit the residential sales of only unincorporated Pickens County, you're picking up sales that are going on in Aspen and Snowmass Village, significantly outweighing sales going on in Basalt. And what you'll do is you see that fee going up. So that is one aspect for discussion for you guys. The next green highlighted item is this AMI, or average median income, that calculation that is thrown out by HUD every spring. So right now we're using 100% AMI and we put down the number and use for the calculation a household of 2 simply because that is the average size of a household occupying an affordable housing unit. So if we're going to be looking at the cost of a dwelling unit on the free market, then we'll try to keep this thing tracking through so that we're not mixing apples and oranges. So the AMI data generated by HUD discriminates by the size of the household. There's singular person, 2 people, 3, and so on. I think it goes up, I forget where they top out. I think it's pretty big. It seems like it's a dozen or 10 at least. So we're looking at a 2-person household and 100% AMI, which means that there are as many people in Pickens County making, or as many households of two persons making over that as are making below that. And that number is $85,200 a year. On reflection, the BOCC thought that number seemed a little high when they looked at what the forecasts were for demand of employee housing. The demand is focused more on 60 or 80% level of AMI, some lesser income. And then it also starts to track over to a situation where, we're really kind of trying to direct our efforts to an 80% housing or 80% household AMI anyway. For example, Basalt Vista, which is a project which is almost completed now, the units are divided up in such a way that to qualify for half of them, you can't make more than 80% AMI, and the other half, the limitation is 100% AMI. So if you, let's see, I'm trying to get to the 80% level of income.
$68,000.
Yeah, I'm looking for the number.
Chart C, I thought in the packet.
Chart B?
Chart C in Chelsea. Pages aren't numbered, so I can't tell you what page, but I thought it was chart C.
Page 9.
Right. Okay. So what we're talking about is instead of having a level of income of 85,200, but reducing that number down to $68,160. Without any more analysis than that, that number was more appealable to the BOCC on an intuitive level, and they felt justified because of the county's previous efforts in housing, and also, as I said, because it seems that that level or even lower is where the need for affordable or employee housing really exists in the community. So that's the second item of consideration for you guys. The other item to consider is the percent mitigation. I mentioned briefly that when this methodology was adopted by the BOCC last year in 2020, there was concern even then that it might be too much of a burden on the real estate economy, the construction economy or industry, the property management, the professions that revolve around property development. And so the decision was made that for all commercial and tourist and any unclassified development that would be approved, that the county would only charge 60% mitigation. So in other words, instead of charging the full impact fee as it's calculated through this exercise, that fee would be reduced to only 60% of that total. And then in the realm of residential construction, it was determined that if and oddly enough, when we analyzed the amount of new employee generation associated with residential development, there was a sharp distinction between locally occupied or a resident occupied residence versus a residence that was occupied by a second home or a third homeowner, something like that. There was a distinct difference in the amount of employment that was generated that really couldn't be ignored. And so there was a distinction made between the two types of residential construction, either second home or local occupancy. The BOCC determined that, well, if it's not locally occupied, then we'll charge the full 100% mitigation. But if it's locally occupied, we'll go a stair step. So from the 5750 level, which is where the fee kicks in, or 5751, up to 8,000 square feet of residential construction, the fee would be reduced to only 60% of its calculated amount. And for construction of locally occupied residence from 8,100 square feet to 11,000 square feet, the mitigation would go up to 80% of the calculated fee. And if you were over 11,001 square feet, then you would be at the 100% level. The BOCC took a look at that, reflected on the crazy state of our real estate economy right now, and didn't feel that it really merited discounting the impact fee for any types of development, either different sizes of residential development or the different classes of residential development, tourist, commercial, residential, and so forth. So those are the principal factors, as Jeffrey initially mentioned when we took up this item, that the BOCC wanted the commission's opinion on, and as to whether or not the commission agreed that these things should be changed, and if so, how. The BOCC thought it would be appropriate to get rid of this variable rate of mitigation, and also felt that it would be appropriate to look at a level of income that was reflected by 80% of the AMI rather than 100%. They didn't go any lower than that because it thought that, the justification really wasn't there yet as far as what the program has been doing. And then they also, as I mentioned before, felt that it was more appropriate to look at sales, real free market residential sales coming from areas that reflected where the county was trying to put its affordable and employee housing efforts. So that would be the entirety of the county and not exclude the municipalities from that calculus. So I guess that frames up where we are and what the BOCC is asking you guys to take a look at. So all of the charts that appear in the memo, as well as the two charts in the attachment, we generated those to give the commission and the BOCC a sense of, well, if you do this, you do that, what does that, what does that affect? How does that change the fee? We picked 4 different representative sizes of residential development just for grins, and then tried to track that through under different permutations. I think we tried to capture everything we could think of anyway. I sure hope we don't have to generate any more charts for you guys. And, on reflection, the chart shouldn't really be the focus. It gives you an idea of where the fee would be, such that if you think it's just too high, then you can, perhaps rethink what your recommendation might be. But in my point of reference, I'm always just looking at what's most legally defensible. Quite frankly, it's legally defensible to elect any type of mitigation or variable degrees of mitigation you feel is appropriate, based on any number of considerations, not only the strengths or weaknesses in the real estate economy at the time, but anything else, or however else you think that the effects of the fee might be felt in the community, or lessening the fee would be felt in the community. The aspect of changing where sales data is collected, to me, legally, it makes the most sense to collect the data from the locations where you expect or where you want to create the housing, because then your fee is more closely related to the reality of where you're going to be developing or creating housing. As far as the AMI, again, I think that is the most defensible from a legal point of view if it's reflecting the community or that aspect of the community that not only has the most need, but where we are actually going to direct our efforts. So I think that if we go to 80% AMI, then implicit with that is where the efforts of the program should be directed. So I think that's about all I have to say to that. Jeffrey put together an email with several pretty in-depth questions that I think are probably more appropriate for your discussion and our, as a staff's contribution to the best we can. So with that, I'll end my presentation. Thanks. Hope it made sense, Chelsea. Hope I didn't fade off there near the end.
No, I was right there with you. I'm just a little nervous about the whole filling in the blanks on the resolution. So,
yeah, I left the resolution with some large blanks because I didn't want to prejudge where you go. So it's wide open for you guys to dictate.
Clean playing field. No, that was a good presentation. Is Ben Anderson going to give any comments, or is there anybody from APSHA here? That gives us some insight as to the city of Aspen's collection of employee impact fees, or
Ben, we would welcome your feedback. And sorry to put you on the spot.
Ben is still on the Zoom. He might have stepped away, I guess.
So,
Jeffrey,
sorry.
this is
Ben,
Ben.
thank you.
This is Ben. Sorry, I was having difficulty with my Zoom controls on my phone. I think thanks for the presentation, John. I will say that, I just got off the phone with a planner from Ketchum, Idaho, recently in the last couple of days, and they use the affordability gap methodology up there as well. Certainly, it's something that the city considered. We did a study after post-recession in 2012, looking at affordability gap, came up with some specific numbers, but the numbers, again, because we were using Aspen free market prices, the numbers were just unpalatable, I think, both to council and to the development community. And so at that time, the city went to, it's kind of the basic framework for its current calculation, which is, around looking at the cost of actually building housing, both from construction costs and land costs. And that's where we are now. But I think that, both our method and your method are based on a whole set of assumptions. that I think, we all are doing our best to defend and make, most reasonable choices on. What you just described, makes sense to me on sort of in a gut check. I will just say that, I think we're also, within the city having extensive conversations. We landed on a fee in lieu. We thought we were doing really well using 2019, 2020 construction costs and from actual projects, some land purchases that we had, including the lumberyard, project. And obviously the last 18 months have shifted those numbers considerably. But we're also, having a conversation about then that next step with, the mitigation that's required. We don't have the same kind of, square footage exemption in the city on residential that's present in the county. We started square foot number one. But one of the conversations that the council's having right now is that we currently give, if somebody does a scrape and replace project, they get an exemption for their current square footage and, subgrade area and all that kind of thing. So, I could talk a lot further, but I just wanted to suggest that, I think while we're operating on different systems, I think we're both engaged in this effort to try to, fairly mitigate, for the generation of necessary housing to house employees. I think that we're both trying to figure out, one, what are those impacts? How do we get the resources that we need to get to build the housing that we're looking to build? And I think every community in the country right now is trying to work through these assumptions, and I think we're in a fortunate position that we can even have these conversations. A lot of communities across the country that are dealing with affordable housing crises right now are, I think they would jump at the chance to have a mitigation fee or fee in lieu program as we do. So, I think there's lots of choices. The city and the county have, we have different processes right now, but I think, both of them have the same outcomes in mind, and both of them, inherently have to make assumptions about what's most fair and what makes most sense. So I guess I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but those are just some general comments listening to John's presentation.
Any questions for Ben?
Thanks,
City
Ben.
of Aspen just updated their fee in lieu in April, so it's free time. Ben, thank you. So questions for John? John, this is a totally minor one. Hopefully it's a 1-minute conversation, but the fees that are generated, can they go towards the care and maintenance of existing projects? So for example, I see we bought, and I think you explicitly said no, but I read it both ways.
The difficulty with that is that, we have some limitations that the city fortunately doesn't have for them, but what we fund our housing program with entirely is an impact fee. So an impact fee, yeah, right, no red. An impact fee is an exaction. I mean, we're basically dipping into the pocket of whoever's, conducting development activity in the county, and whether that development activity is reflected by a change of use, say, taking a structure that was residential and converting it to have some commercial element or something, some change like that, or if it's reflected by new construction, new physical construction. And so the analysis that is allowed for an impact fee, so that, to justify our, collection of this money from people developing property is limited in many respects. It was limited by the common law for a number of years, but it was codified in the state legislature when the state legislature thought that local communities were getting just too far in a field and too aggressive under the law in imposing fees on developers or users of property. And so the fee is designed that it first and foremost has to mitigate the actual impact from the actual development that has been permitted to occur. So we can't use the fee to backfill a problem. It's difficult to be able to justify the fee and for rehabilitation of existing housing, because in so doing, we'd be taking money and not creating fee to mitigate against the creation of additional employment, but to maintain residences that were essentially created and added to the employee housing inventory, so to speak, for impacts and events that happened, far in the past, perhaps. So we're kind of constrained. Well, we are definitely constrained on the use of this fee. And, say for example, in the case of Centennial, the problems that particular development is facing, I think, is known to everybody. It's certainly been covered in the press over the years. And that was one of the very first projects that was ever built. And in fact, the city and the county did it before they created APCHA. They did it in concert with one another. And for us to use our impact fee, which is to mitigate the creation of employment for development happening right now when a permit is issued, is really contrary to state law, and I think would leave us in a vulnerable position to have somebody challenge the fee. So what we're trying to do, and given the fact that there is such a shortfall of housing anyway, it's not like that problem has been solved and we can go back and try to rehab previously created housing inventory. We try to keep it moving forward to the creation of new housing. And to, at least in part, to some of your earlier questions, Jeffrey, like, well, what have we been doing? For the longest time, the biggest dilemma for the county is to find a place to develop housing. There was a real tension between people who wanted to just create housing and do it versus people who did not want to see growth extending, residential growth in particular, extending outside of UGB areas. And then, spreading out, so to speak, within the rural areas of the county. So there's that. Finding a spot to develop is difficult. And then once you find a spot, trying to design a project that is acceptable to the neighbors that are invariably around any property is another real problem. So for a while, the county was putting most of its efforts in buying up condominiums on the free market. And then what we would either do is deed restrict them, so to speak, and then resell them to qualified employees, or we would keep them under county ownership and rent them to qualified employees. We were fortunate, I suppose, to be able to rescue the Phillips Trailer Park. That property was acquired by the county in order to preserve what was de facto housing. The family that owned the property approached us and said, listen, the family's gotten to a point of being large enough that the majority of the people want to cash out. We're going to have to transact this thing. We're going to have to sell it, which means to get the highest and best price, which means that all those trailers have to go. The property be graded over and reseeded and dressed up and sold to accommodate a larger residential development, either on one or maybe as many as 3 or 4 lots. So they approached us for the opportunity to purchase it. We jumped at it because there's no way the housing program could have absorbed those. And at the time, there were 60 people living on the property in 45 different units or spaces. And now that we have it, it gives us the ability to not only create it there from essentially, free market, even though the free market price, the Noyce family and the Phillips family before them really gave everybody a great deal out there. But, we can put additional housing on that property. There is a lot of open area to accommodate additional housing. But, we'll still have to have the discussion with the neighbors when we try to figure out how much additional housing would be appropriate. We got lucky again when we partnered up with the school district and Habitat for Humanity for the Basalt Vista project I mentioned a little bit ago. The school district put in the land, the county put in the money, and Habitat put in the construction ability and wherewithal. And the units are about completed. The county, at the end of the day, received 13 units. I think the district had 12 or 11. And that turned out to be a great project. It's right next to the Basalt High School, which is not surprising because the land was owned by the school district. So they just carved off a small section that was associated with the high school development project. And that's what was developed. So that worked out pretty good. So from time to time, opportunities like that present themselves. And well, like you stated, Jeffrey, it's an opportunistic sort of a thing. We look for things that might present themselves that we could convert into, real occupied housing. So there's that.
Does and maybe this is a Phyllis question, but does someone, sorry, let me back up. When we reviewed the PDJ with the town of Basalt, we had a joint meeting pre-pandemic. And one of the things that Basalt did really well was basically identify the key parcels sort of within their UGB and how they wanted their town to roll the next 10 years. And it looks like they're really successful in those, lot J's being developed on Emma Road and across the street because they have the underpass. And does the county maintain something else or something similar that sort of, full disclosure, I worked for Habitat 2 years ago. I'm not an employee today. I mean, I've heard the same conversation. They're seeking and they're looking, but I guess it goes back to, do we have a glide path of uses going forward? I don't picture the Roaring Fork Valley as a TOD where we're just going to populate everyone on Highway 82. And so we're going to have these conflicts with neighbors. But if we had a really well-articulated, like Basalt, here's the parcels we're going to develop. And I think Basalt's done a fantastic job the last couple of years in, not only in Old Town, but at the TOD, if you will, and additionally with Willett and what Seacoast's just done through this recession. So I guess maybe it's a Phil's question, but it's really just, do we have a better definition of where we're going to use the funds going forward?
Well,
and you might have said opportunistic might be the answer still.
Well, I guess, we don't have what Basalt has. In other words, certain properties identified as appropriate for affordable housing or employee housing, which I agree with you. That was a good move on the part of the town. It definitely was forward thinking. And I can't remember now if the town enacted zoning following that determination such that, the property was zoned consistent with what was deemed to be an appropriate use. But, to the extent that the county could partner with the town or we'd love to partner with Habitat again, that worked out pretty darn good. There were some sticking points down there, but at the end of the day, I think the project turned out really well. Other than that, the only thing that we would be able to do in that similar vein would be to take a look at property in the unincorporated areas of the county, which would be under our land use jurisdiction, and identify them as appropriate locations for housing development and then zone them, accordingly. That's a difficult task. It would fall back on the P&Z to participate in that considerably, quite frankly. And it would be a tough one because, it seems to invite more dispute, I think, in the county because you're dealing with an area that is more rural. And so people who have bought property or who have been on property for a while have an expectation that it will always be rural and have that characteristic. And if you want to create housing, it makes the most financial sense to increase the density associated with the property's development. So it's not, spread out more than it has to be. And you see an enclave like, an example of one that works certainly would be Aspen Village. And, something like that. So, but no, that I'm sure there are a lot of people thinking about things like that, but it hasn't been taken to that sort of conclusion in the county as it was in Basalt.
Understood. But I think this conversation helps with, so on page 14, John outlined the 3 questions he had for planning and zoning. And I think this discussion, last 10 minutes, are really about the area of sales data. And I think, I'm not going to put words in planning and zoning's mouth, but it sounds to me from this conversation, you said where we build should be where we're taking the data from. And so I'm hearing that we need to widen that net from beyond unincorporated. So that might be the easiest one to answer. And again, planning and zoning commissioners may disagree. But so page 14 are John's 3 questions for the evening. And I was sticking with number 2 because it's sort of, again, the map of where we build. And I think it was John's point that where we build, the area of sales data should extend beyond just unincorporated county and should include municipal data. Comments, feedback on that? Number 2.
I didn't see if they did that calculation. I understand the principle of the change from collecting data from unincorporated to including City of Aspen, Cinemas Village, but what does that do to spike the price per square foot? I'm guessing it increases it substantially, and it somewhat overlaps with what the City of Aspen is already doing in their implementation and exaction of their own fees. So I wouldn't want it to be redundant and cause a spike. It would upset the balance of where we are now.
I wouldn't want to be redundant either, but for example, when we did Basalt Vista, we partnered with the school district and Habitat, but the town also played a role in that. In the City of Aspen, you have a governmental entity, the city itself, that is fairly accomplished at developing housing projects. I mean, they're scattered throughout town, and then of course the biggest example being Burlingame, which is ongoing. A number of years ago, not that long ago, the city approached the county and inquired basically, hey, do you guys want to participate in the next Burlingame phase? We just didn't have the funds available to join in, which I think at this point is something that, a few people in the county regret, not being able to participate. So there's that to think about too. If the city has a project and they're looking for partners to join in, but if we don't have the resources to do it, then it'd be like Burlingame. The city would be doing it by itself.
John,
Sure, that's a fair point. But I just want to know what happens to the price per square foot. Like right now, it's $633 on your table.
Oh, the price per square foot definitely goes up.
How substantially?
It goes up. What we did was we reflected the change in what the impact fee would be for different sized houses of development in the county, what would be charged to somebody. But I didn't go through and produce a chart that would reflect, this is the price per square foot in the unincorporated versus the city kind of thing. I probably can find something that at least shows the
median household of the whole county. Is that, yeah.
Yeah. If I poke around a bit, I might be able to find something for you. See what I can do.
I follow your table. I understood exactly what you're showing, and I understand the question. I just am curious what that what the median market price per square foot of heated floor area is for the entire county rather than unincorporated sales. Because you're asking us to switch to incorporated and unincorporated sales as the factor that influences this calculation. So that's the only thing I need to know in order to tell you yes or no, I agree or disagree.
I'm looking to see if I can fill in the answer to your question.
We could table that issue and talk about other stuff if you'd like. Or if Jeffrey wants to move on to one of the other questions on our fill in the blank resolution.
You want to move up to number one?
Because you want us, yeah, go back to one?
Yeah.
Because I agree with the recommendation. I'll just tell you my opinion. I agree that it should be maybe 80, well, I agree development should pay its way, but I liked it at the 60% mitigation. I don't know why we have to jump so substantially from 60 to 100 at this juncture. But
Chelsea, I got lucky.
did you find it?
So under an analysis for unincorporated areas of the county sales data, the price per square foot is $633. That's on the chart we were just looking at. If you include all of the 3 municipal areas in the sales data, the price per square foot goes from $633 to $865.
So that's a $200,000 increase in the size of the gap, right?
Right. And let's see, I can, let's see.
It's a more than $200,000 increase in the affordability gap that you're calculating.
It's a 36% increase.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's
Here's a spreadsheet that we generated that reflects the AMI staying the same at 100%. It reflects 2021 data. So, you know, there's the AMI being currently what it is and for the fee today. If we went to all county sales, we end up with this much per square foot. That translates into this kind of market value. In other words, that times 1,100 square feet is that much of a cost for free market housing. And then translating that back into the gap, the same income gap that we're dealing with today, then you get a per employee fee of $374,943 instead of the current fee of $214,532.
Okay, well, that
I don't have the skill to toggle back and forth on those two charts. It's one or
that's
nothing.
right. I'm toggling. That's okay. I'm doing it on my own computer screen with my Zoom in the packet. That trickles down because then your 10% administration charge doubles, nearly doubles.
Right.
Your 10% administration charge went up to 59,000. It was 34,000. So
Here,
I don't know if the administration work increases that much more simply by expanding the polling area or the area from which sales data is collected.
it
So
doesn't.
I struggle with that.
Right. The administrative charge, I mean, the bottom line administrative expense doesn't change at all. It's simply that 10% is an acceptable figure to legally justify if we were challenged. So that's why it's there. And like I said, hopefully, hopefully we have more real data in the future so we don't have to use a fudge like that. But let me make a suggestion. Let me make a suggestion in regard to the area that we're using to collect sales data. You know, like I said, I agree with Jeffrey's point of view that it, reflect where we are or where we're trying to create housing. However, the other aspect of the fee is determining the level of mitigation. The reason that level of mitigation was reduced from 100% initially by the BOCC is they weren't comfortable with the sticker shock, so to speak, on where the fee was coming out. So I would suggest if you feel that is escalating too much, that the more appropriate change or area of change wouldn't be the aspect of where the sales data is being collected, but in the degree of mitigation. In other words, it seems like you're talking about reducing the mitigation level from 100% down, but the calculus utilizing all of the areas within the county is truer to the actual efforts of the program. Just a suggestion.
No, that's a good suggestion, just based on where that factor falls in the calculation, like procedure of making the calculation. So yeah. I suggest keeping it at the 60% mitigation if you're going to expand the scope of the area where the sales data is collected. And I also agree with the 80% AMI versus 100% AMI while we're listing things that we need to decide on the resolution. That was one of your recommendations in the presentation, right, John?
Right. Well, that's my recommendation, but primarily it's just the three areas of discussion: the level of mitigation, the AMI, and the area of sales data collection.
Chelsea,
Yeah, I'll reiterate what I'm thinking, and then you guys can tell me what you're thinking too. But in response to question number one, I think the mitigation percentage of the fee to be required should stay at 60%. And then I think the area from which the sales data out of free market residential properties is collected, it's fair to be the entire county rather than unincorporated, which shifts the price per square foot to that 800 number John showed us, $800 per square foot figure that he showed us just now. And then I also think that the BOCC is headed in the right direction with the AMI used to rather than 100% AMI because the type of people who are living in employee housing are going to qualify at that 80% AMI level. I think that the factor used in this calculation should be 80% AMI. So that's my absorption of John's presentation and my feedback in response to it, for what it's worth.
Can I ask you a question, Chelsea? When you say the mitigation should be at 60%, do you mean 60% across the board, or simply leaving the level of mitigation the way it is, 60% for commercial, tourist, and unclassified, and then that variable rate for the housing, or just 60 flat?
Exactly. Thank you for correcting me, John. I guess I meant to imply to leave it the way it is, and technically laid out as you just described.
Okay.
It's a mouthful to get in, so I was just trying to be brief with the 60%, but you articulated it more thoroughly. Thank you.
So basically, the big change from Chelsea's proposal would be 2 and 3, would be the AMI change and the sales data change.
It's not necessarily my recommendation, but I'm agreeing with the feedback.
But the 3 levers, I like where you're going. I mean, I think.
Oh, that's the call of the question here, is to answer those 3, to give feedback in those 3 areas. And I thought that John explained the logic of the BOCC and the logic of the calculation well enough for me to understand and give feedback on in those 3 areas to that degree. And I welcome everybody else's comments.
Zach, Cliff, or Monty, feedback for either John or Chelsea. I mean, I guess my feedback would be increasing the price per square foot results in, it's almost a 74% change per employee if you actually include unincorporated, if you increase the municipalities. In other words, you go from 633 to 865, the offset would go from 214 to 374, which is actually 74%.
That's a lot.
Yeah, no, I could live with that. But I think it's a bold recommendation that said we thought through all three levers in terms of this discussion. Is that clear, Vermont?
I have no comment at this time, so I'm just listening.
Sheriff?
My personal opinion would be to definitely increase the percentage of mitigation above 60%. I think, if we're going to say that we believe that development should pay their own way, well, then technically development paying their own way would be 100% mitigation level. And because if we're at 60%, then they're really just paying 60% of their way for mitigating employee housing. So technically, we either believe in employee housing, we believe in the program, and we want to fund it, or we don't. And that's really the decision where I'm at. And I don't think 100% mitigation, I don't think we need to go there. I don't think it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Politically feasible, but I think something above 80% is fine. And I also think that all these numbers are proportional. So when we're talking about something like, it increasing a couple $100,000 because we include a larger area that we're using to calculate the cost. The idea that right now in this market, somebody who's buying a $9 or $10 million lot and building a 14,000 square foot house in Starwood that's going to cost them $20 million. I think the idea that they look at this number, and if it's a couple $100,000 more, they take their business to like Eagle County or somewhere else. I don't think that's happening. And so it seems like a lot to me, the increase, because it's a lot. But these numbers, we have to plug these numbers into the investment that these people are making building these homes, and whether or not it's a lot to them. And then also the long-term investment in the county for funding employee housing at a higher rate, what that does in 15, 20, 30, 40 years, and what that does for everyone's quality of life, the amount of cars that are on the highway, the amount of environmental impact that has, all of that. So I guess if we're making a recommendation to the BOCC, I think this boils down a lot to whether the P&Z, whether the board, we believe in these new calculations are going to properly fund this program. And if the county believes in the program and we believe in the program, then we should try to fund it accordingly. That's my thought.
Follow up on Zach's comment.
Those are all fair points.
Yeah, I guess the only point I have is Monty, that is we always look at, we're talking about the people who build the $20 million houses and stuff, the big ones, but how does this affect the smaller average local people who are building their houses? And how does that impact fee hit them from the smaller scale of this? It's not a sliding scale, right? It's just across the board.
Monty, we're above 5750 in this whole conversation, and John can correct me, but the answer is it is 100% of this conversation is 5751 feet and above. So this is this is an exaction fee on site, and it's each of the tables in front of you do not show a single home below below the growth management exemption, I guess would be the other way to put it.
Mhm.
Right, so this is someone who has a TDR or, is paying $800,000 or $900,000 to add square footage in today's market, or has gone through the growth management quota system and received an allocation from this body, an
Okay.
annual allocation.
Yeah, I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
No,
We
That's
also,
absolutely right.
we're separating out full-time residences, are on a different sliding or different scale than second homes, right? And that was part of the graph we saw which falls in line, and I agree with Monty, that I really like the idea of second homeowners having a different scale than full-time residences. My question for staff would be, I'm in property management, and I've seen in the past year and a half how much time I have a lot of clients that have basically moved here, right? What's the enforcement mechanism, or what are we using as a metric to differentiate between a full-time resident and a second homeowner? Because most of these homeowners own other homes somewhere else. It's just how many months of the year they're living here, or if they change their residence to Pickens County and start paying taxes here, or I'm wondering how we're deciding that.
So the way the program is set up to work is that the assumption, whenever a residential property is built,
Okay.
the assumption is that it is for a non-resident person, and so that fee is charged right up front. If the owner of the property or the developer of the property says, no, I live here, I'm going to live here, this is my full-time residence, then what happens is we essentially accept them at their word, but then we take a covenant from them. So the covenant that they execute upon the recognition of a lower fee to be paid states that this property will be the legal residence of the owner, signed off, blah, blah, blah. Now, it is a bit of a fudge when somebody says they're legal residents, because there's no set amount of time that you have to be there. It's just what you do to manifest that as your legal residence. Do you register your cars there? Do you register to vote there? That kind of stuff. So, I mean, there's ability to somewhat perhaps game the system, but we try to watch it pretty carefully. And for the most part, even if somebody is intending to use that as their sort of full-time residence when it's built, they won't try to necessarily get that reduced fee and then record the covenant, because they're already thinking about selling the property and they don't want the covenant on the property. It's because it would reduce the sales price. So, I'm sure, like every other county regulation, there are issues with enforcement when the rubber meets the road, but I mean, that's how the system is working now.
Yeah.
So we're approaching the top of the hour. Cliff, I think I'm in your hearing aids. If you could just mute for a second, that would be awesome. Thank you. I'm hearing two proposals that we could go back to the BOTC with, that we could have one resolution that we agree, but actually fill in the blank as either 60 or 100% mitigation, 80% AMI, and the scope being the entire county. So I know it's not fully answering the question we're choosing to provide two answers to the first question. And would that be acceptable to the planning and zoning commissioners? And acceptable to John? I mean, I think I'm hearing both cases on number one. I'm hearing 60 and 100 a percentage. Number two, I'm hearing entire county, and number three, I'm hearing 80% AMI. So it's giving some direction to the BOCC, but we didn't in this time fully solve number one. I think it's, I'm just hearing there's a consensus, but we still don't know on number one. John, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry about that. I thought I was the source of the feedback, so I muted myself. Well, you've got a pretty good articulation from Chelsea and from Zach, so I don't know where the rest of the commission fills in on it, but it seems that there's agreement on the area of sales data collection and on the percentage of AMI. But there is a difference of opinion on the whether to reduce the level of mitigation required or not. And that is to either leave it the way it is or to put it as 100%. So, I mean, it's up to you guys. I mean, you can express a majority opinion, say on the first two, if that's the way the whole commission feels, and you can express individual opinions on the third one, or you can think about it some more, or you can take a vote and see which way it goes. And then whoever's on the losing side, the opinion will equally be expressed to the board so that they know that there was this discussion and, you know, what the competing values were and why and all that sort of thing. So it's whatever, however you guys want to handle it.
Chelsea and then Zach, please. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Jeff. I think that Zach made a very compelling argument, and I don't disagree with his point. I just was kind of trying to keep in mind that the reason that they chose to mitigate at the 60% level and the tiered structure that John re-explained. And I think it was to avoid the sticker shock and to not punish or create some sort of a penalty that would negatively impact the construction industry that is the benefits and economically is a large part of our county's economic system. So I can't exactly remember the rationale behind it, but I would compromise on like an 80% mitigation, or I could be persuaded to go to 100%, but I would just keep in mind that we would want to be able to review that again next year and discuss whether that 100% mitigation did in some way cause a lot of, sticker shock and cause the construction industry that fuels this development to suffer in some way, because that would, I would say, be a negative unintended consequence if we were to go to 100% mitigation and say development has to pay its way, and then all of a sudden our construction crews are out of work. I don't know if that's going to happen right now because I see so much activity, especially at the over 5750 level. So but then again, I'm not an economic forecaster. I just want to make recommendations to the BOCC that are reasonable and measured and not quite so big of a shift all at once that the price jumps up so drastically. But I do agree with Zach's argument.
Chelsea, thanks for bringing that up. It was in my notes to mention, and I skipped right over it. Any changes that are done can be undone or done in a different way, and the annual review will continue. I wouldn't think that the real estate activity that we're all seeing is going to change in just 1 year, but you don't know. I mean, for all we know, we'll be in another shutdown or lockdown, or it comes.
God hope not.
We do, but I mean, who knows, right?
Sure.
So, but at any rate, it will always be reviewed every year. And so if there is something that needs to be tweaked and you don't like this, you don't like that, it went, whatever, there's always that, ability to reevaluate.
Thanks, John. What were you going to say, Zach?
Oh, I guess I was just going to throw out there, the last thing I would want to do is to have any, have this have an economic impact on the construction industry. Most guys that I've talked to in the construction industry, and Monty could probably chime in on this as well, they're talking about, they're booked out to like 2023. And if you have a TDR right now, you could sell it for whatever you want. And I guess my take is that, and like I said, I'm not interested in doing 100%. I think 90 would be great. We can always go down, like next year, the year after, in 6 months, and or wherever when we meet again, we can always bring this, if things slow down, we can bring this down. We might never have the chance again to bring it back up, just because that's how this works. And I guess I have a question for staff, and I don't know, this might be a hard question to answer. What I would like to know is, tell me the difference in employee housing units. Like if we kept it at 60% or we took it up to 90%, like in 20 years or 10 years, how many more units or how many units people are we mitigating for that might get an employee housing unit down the line? Is that, I know it's a tough thing to calculate, but there's an exact financial, there's a number in there that I would love to have that number, because then it kind of puts a little better, puts a kind of a face on it for everyone to, if they know, oh, there's like 100 more units or 100 less units that are funded or not, or mitigated for or not mitigated for.
I think that's good too. I just don't want to seem arbitrary and capricious. I guess, yeah, you're making an argument to increase to 90 based on economic supply and demand, and the demand for Aspen is high right now, or for Pickens County. I just don't want to like move the dial just on a whim. It has to be based on what we see as the real need for mitigation.
Zach, you kind of touched on that whole thing initially. It's the economy of opportunity, and you're right. I don't have the ability to calculate that out. I'm not sure if anybody would, because there are so many changing variables. If you don't build 20 units this year, will you be able to build them next year or the year after? If you change, because we're always behind the curve. We're always chasing something. We're never in a position of saying we're caught up. So I can't answer your question as far as that goes.
So, hey, my comment on that, as far as the construction world right now, I don't think whatever fee we put on it's going to slow this train down, tremendously. It's out of control to the point like 205, but that, I don't care how far people are booked out, that changes really quick too. So nobody can, forecast the economic, whatever's going to happen these days anyway. But, I think that any kind of change, you want to take steps. It could be, we'll look at it again next year. So I think we take a good step, 80% or whatever, and see how that goes. I really don't think 80 to 100% will even, like I say, make a difference in the construction world. If it did, I would vote for 100%, because I think it really does need to be toned down some. It's everybody we deal with in the construction world is way overwhelmed with what's going on, and it causes a lot of other effects to the quality of work being done. Like I say, the impact to the county. So, if it would slow it down, I would be 100% to go to 100% immediately. That's just how I feel, and I'm in the construction business. But I just don't like doing total extremes. I always like to, road test and take it down up to like 80% or something like that. See how it goes next year. We can always go up. We can always go down. So that's kind of my 2 cents. But I'm not worried about the construction industry or our crews and stuff suffering from this percentage we're dealing with right now. And we're all in agreement that employee housing is one of the greatest things that this county puts out in any county. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Thanks, Monty. Cliff has his hand up.
After listening to everybody, I feel as though 100%, because this is the only time you're going to be able to do something like that. And as each of you have said, you can always reel it back later. But right now, things are out of control. Construction's out of control. Monty says you're booked out way into the future. So this is the time to do as much as you can for affordable housing, no halfway measures.
So I still think we have two potential motions tonight. We're stuck on number one, whether it's 100% or 80%. We could all by show of hands say, yes, that would likely pass 4-1 on 100% or 4-1 on 80%. We could have one resolution from all of planning and zoning that everyone would agree between 80 and 100% and forward that to the OCC. So it'd be 100% or 80% mitigation. It would be the entire county for the area where the sales data are connected. And we're pretty much unanimous all evening on 80% AMI. So it's really just, we could as a group have one resolution that's going to pass 4-1 or another resolution that's going to pass probably 4-1. Or we could punt, say 80 to 100 and turn it over to the county commissioners. But we would have a probably unanimous planning and zoning feedback on my collective thoughts.
That sounds good to me.
So I'm hearing that there's one motion in planning and zoning. We're punting whether it's 80% or 100%, but we're saying the mitigation percentage. So now that, sorry, a resolution of the, I would look for a motion of the resolution of Planning and Zoning Commission of Mitigation County, Colorado, recommending approval of an amendment to sections 830 and 240-130 of the Pickens County Land Use Code, implementing a new methodology for calculating the employee housing impact fee. We are therefore resolving that the mitigation percentage of the fee to be required a building permit is between 80 and 100%. One. Two, the area from which sales data of free market residential properties is collected includes the entire county and not just unincorporated Pickens County. But again, the premise there is we want to collect where we build. And number three, that the percentage of the area median income to be used in calculation of the impact fee is 80% AMI. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I would make that motion.
I'll second
Yeah.
it.
Thank you, Chelsea. Any further discussion for Suzanne or for John Ely? So this is where we thank both Bonnie and Suzanne and John for their time this evening, and thanks to Ben Anderson again for filling in from the city of Aspen. Appreciate the cooperation. Cliff Weiss, you've got your hand up, but your vote on Chelsea's motion and Zach's second, which is the resolution of the Planning and Zoning Commission of Pickens County, Colorado, recommending approval and amendment to section 830 and 240-130 of the Pickens County Land Use Code, implementing a new methodology for calculating the employee housing impact fee. We're resolving mitigation percentage of the fee to be required a building permit is going to be between 80 and 100%, number one. Number two, the area from which sales data of free market residential properties, type one there, is collected, which would include the entire county, including municipalities, within the nature of the resolution that we collect or we use the data from where we build. And number three, that the percentage of the area mean income to be used in calculation of the impact fees, which is at 80% AMI. Cliff Weiss.
Are we voting?
We are voting, unless there was any further comment. Sorry.
No, no further comment. I'll vote aye.
Monty Thompson,
Yes.
Chelsea Clark,
I vote in favor, yes.
Zachary Matthews,
Yes.
and Jeffrey Woodruff is also a yes or an aye. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you again, county commissioners and planning and zoning commissioners and staff and everyone who participated this evening. So thanks so much for your time. Any further business? Otherwise, it is 7:13, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn. But John Ely, I'll give you the table and say any further final thoughts.
I just want to thank you guys for a great discussion. I really appreciate it. I left that I left that last number 4 in there for you guys in case you wanted to say something else, like, get off your ass and do some housing or, whatever.
I think I think we had a discussion about number 4. I think that was, in our conversations, as planning and zoning met with Basalt and talked about the PPJ, I think it's really, and Chelsea touched on it a year ago, which is have more of a laser sharp focus. The same way the city of Aspen's rallying around the lumberyard or Skico's rallying around Willits. Like, what's the next Basalt Vista? What's the queue? What's the pipeline? Where's the money going? And I think that's number 4 is, guys, we want to know the usage. Where are you putting this money to work? So that's
Well, I'll tell you what, that wasn't part of your vote, but I'll definitely express that to the board when I talk to them.
I appreciate it. Motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Thank you. Enjoy your
Adjourn.
evening. Be well,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody. Thanks,
Look forward
everyone.
to seeing everyone in person at some point. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.